I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment on March 15th, scrolling through Facebook on my 28th birthday, expecting to see the usual handful of birthday wishes from distant relatives and old college friends. Instead, my heart stopped when I saw the photos. My entire family gathered around an elaborate three-tier chocolate cake with pink roses singing and laughing in our childhood dining room. The birthday girl beaming in the center wasn't me. It was my sister Claire, whose birthday isn't until August. The caption under my mother's post read, "The only one who deserves celebrating." I stared at my phone screen, feeling that familiar hollow ache in my chest, but this time, something different stirred beneath it, something harder. I typed a simple comment, "Nice cake." Within minutes, my mother Margaret replied, "At least someone's worth baking for." I closed my laptop, smiled for the first time that day, and typed back, "Enjoy it, while you can." That same night, I made one transfer, sent 2 emails. My war had begun. The story I'm about to tell you begins 3 years ago when my grandmother Helen passed away and left me something nobody in my family knew about. While everyone assumed she had nothing to give, Helen had quietly saved $60,000 over decades of careful living. She left it all to me with a letter that still sits in my desk drawer, explaining that she'd watched my parents favor Claire my entire life and wanted to give me the support I'd never received. The inheritance came with one condition: I could use it however I chose, but I had to promise to think carefully about what real family support meant. I'd been using that money to secretly help Claire for the past 3 years. Through a shell company I created called Westfield Holdings, I'd been paying her rent, car payments, and credit card bills. I thought I was being the supportive older sister I'd always wished I'd had. Every month, $1,500 for rent, $400 for her car, and whatever she needed to cover her credit card minimums. I watched her social media posts about her amazing independent life, her financial freedom, and her success, never knowing that every single bit of it was built on my grandmother's inheritance. What I discovered tonight as I pulled up 3 years of bank records was that Claire had been using the financial security I provided not to build a career or save money, but to live a lifestyle completely beyond her actual means. She'd been spending money on designer clothes, expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Napa Valley and Las Vegas, all while working part-time at a marketing company and telling everyone she was financially independent. The monthly amount I'd been sending her was more than her actual salary, but instead of being grateful or even aware, she'd been living like she earned it herself. The first email I sent that night went to Marcus, Claire's landlord. I'd been in contact with him through the Westfield Holdings business account for 3 years, and he knew me only as a property management representative. The email was simple formal notice that Westfield Holdings would be terminating the lease arrangement for Unit 4B at the end of the month. The second email went to American Express, where I'd been listed as a financial guarantor for Claire's credit card. I requested immediate removal of my guarantee and notification that I would no longer be responsible for any charges after the current billing cycle. As I sat there in my cramped studio apartment surrounded by second-hand furniture and wearing a sweater with a small hole in the elbow, I thought about how my family saw me. The struggling daughter, the one who couldn't get her life together, the disappointment. They had no idea that I'd been supporting their golden child's entire lifestyle while they criticized me for not being more like her. Tomorrow, that would all change. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in years: control. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I created a fake social media account and spent hours deep diving into Claire's online presence. What I found made my stomach turn with a mixture of rage and disbelief. My sister hadn't just been living off my financial support, she'd been using it to build an elaborate fiction about her life that she broadcasts to the world. Her Instagram was a carefully curated gallery of success. Photos of her in designer dresses at charity galas, pictures from expensive restaurants with captions about treating myself because I work so hard. and vacation shots from weekend getaways with hashtags like blessed and living my best life. Every single experience she posted about had been funded by my grandmother's inheritance money she didn't even know existed. But it got worse. I found posts where she'd given advice to younger women about financial independence. The key to success, she'd written just 2 months ago, is learning to live within your means and building genuine financial security. Too many people rely on others instead of creating their own opportunities. The post had over 200 likes and dozens of comments from women thanking her for the inspiration. I screenshotted everything, my hands shaking as I discovered post after post where Claire portrayed herself as a self-made success story. She'd even written a LinkedIn article called How I Achieve Financial Freedom by 25 that had been shared by her company and featured in their newsletter. In it, she talked about the importance of budgeting, saving, and avoiding financial dependence on family members. The most devastating discovery came when I found a private Facebook group called Women in Marketing Success Stories, where Claire was an active member. In post after post, she'd shared detailed stories about her journey to financial independence, giving specific advice about negotiating salaries, managing expenses, and building savings. Women in the group looked up to her, asking for mentorship and guidance. She'd even been invited to speak at a local college about financial empowerment for young professionals. While I was reading her fake advice about financial responsibility, I got a text from our cousin David asking if I could lend him $500 to cover his car repair. I'd loaned money to family members before, small amounts I could barely afford, while my sister, who was secretly living off thousands of my dollars every month, was being praised for her financial wisdom. That evening, I called our mutual friend Jessica from high school, someone who'd stayed in touch with both of us over the years. I have to ask you something, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Has Claire ever mentioned me to you recently? Jessica hesitated before answering, which told me everything I needed to know. Bernadine, I probably shouldn't say this, but yeah, she has. She's worried about you, actually. She thinks you're jealous of her success and that it's affecting your mental health. She mentioned that you've been struggling financially and that it's made you bitter toward people who are doing well. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for an hour, processing what I'd learned. Not only had Claire been living off my secret financial support for 3 years, but she'd been using that false security to criticize me to our mutual friends. She'd painted herself as the concerned sister, worried about her jealous, unsuccessful sibling, all while literally living off the money I was providing. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to stop the financial support. I was going to expose every lie she'd built her reputation on. Claire had made her life into a house of cards, and I was about to show everyone what happened when the foundation was removed. To understand how Claire and I ended up here, I need to take you back to our childhood in suburban Phoenix, where the pattern of favoritism began before I was old enough to understand what was happening to me. Claire is 2 years younger than me, but from the moment she could walk and talk, our parents treated her like she was made of gold, while I was treated like I was made of obligations. When Claire wanted to take dance lessons at age 5, our parents enrolled her immediately and drove her to classes twice a week for 8 years. When I asked to join the school debate team at age 13, they said we couldn't afford the tournament fees and suggested I find a cheaper hobby. When Claire wanted to go to summer camp, they sent her to a prestigious arts camp in Colorado for 3 summers running. When I wanted to attend a science camp, they said I was old enough to get a summer job instead. The pattern continued through high school and college. Claire got a new car for her 16th birthday, while I bought my own used Honda with money from my part-time job at a local grocery store. Our parents paid for Claire's entire college experience at a private university, while I worked 20 hours a week and took out student loans to attend the state school. When Claire struggled with her classes, they hired expensive tutors. When I needed help with calculus, they told me to go to the free tutoring center. But our grandmother Helen saw everything. She lived 3 blocks away and spent considerable time at our house when we were growing up. Helen would watch our parents shower Claire with attention and resources while expecting me to be self-sufficient and grateful for whatever scraps of support they offered. She never said anything directly, but I could see the disapproval in her eyes during family dinners when the conversation inevitably centered around Claire's achievements, while my accomplishments were mentioned only in passing. Helen passed away during my final year of college, and I was the only family member who consistently visited her during her last months. Claire was too busy with her social life, and our parents said they couldn't handle seeing her so weak. I spent hours sitting beside her hospital bed, listening to her stories about growing up during the Great Depression and learning about the kind of strength that comes from genuine hardship. The letter she left me with the inheritance explained everything I'd suspected but never been able to articulate. Bernadine, she wrote, "I've watched your parents treat you like you were born to serve, and Claire like she was born to be served. You've spent your life working twice as hard for half the recognition, and it breaks my heart. This money isn't charity. You've earned it through every moment you chose kindness over resentment, work over entitlement, and grace over bitterness. Use it wisely, but don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having it." The cruel irony was that I'd been using Helen's gift to perpetuate the exact dynamic she'd tried to help me escape. For 3 years, I'd been enabling Claire's lifestyle while continuing to struggle myself, maintaining the pattern where I worked and sacrificed, while she benefited effortlessly. Helen had given me the means to change my life, and instead, I'd used it to subsidize the golden child treatment that had damaged me for decades. But tonight, I'd learned something that changed everything. I discovered that our parents had borrowed $8,000 from Claire 6 months ago to pay for our father's dental work and our mother's car repairs, money that had ultimately come from my inheritance, though none of them knew it. Claire had loaned money to our parents using funds I'd provided, then basked in their gratitude and praise for being the successful daughter who could help her family in a time of need. The favoritism had come full circle. I was now indirectly paying for my parents' expenses while they celebrated Claire as their financial savior and continued to see me as the disappointment who couldn't get her life together. Helen had tried to give me the tools to break free from this dynamic, and I'd use them to reinforce it instead. But that was about to change. The next morning, I called Marcus, Claire's landlord, from my work phone during my lunch break. For 3 years, our relationship had been strictly professional through the Westfield Holdings account, but now I needed to have a conversation as myself. I'd been dreading this call, but I knew it was necessary to understand the full extent of what I'd been enabling. "Marcus, this is Bernadine Walsh," I said when he answered. "I need to talk to you about the Westfield Holdings account and the payments for Unit 4B. There was a pause before he responded, and I could hear him shuffling papers. "Is there a problem with the account? We've never had any issues with payments." "I need you to know that I'm the person behind Westfield Holdings," I explained. "The tenant in 4B is my sister, and she doesn't know I've been paying her rent. I'm calling to let you know that the payments will be stopping at the end of this month." What Marcus told me during that conversation made my decision to cut off support feel not just justified, but necessary for everyone involved. Claire hadn't just been a regular tenant living quietly in her apartment. She'd been a problem from the beginning, despite never having to worry about making rent payments. "Your sister is hands down the most difficult tenant I've ever dealt with," Marcus said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "She treats the building like she owns it. She's constantly complaining about minor issues, demanding immediate repairs for things that aren't emergencies, and threatening to break her lease if I don't accommodate her requests immediately." He told me about the time Claire called him at 11 p.m. on a Sunday night because her garbage disposal was making a noise, demanding that he come fix it immediately or she'd report him to the city housing authority. He described how she'd painted the walls of her apartment without permission, then demanded he reimburse her for the paint because she'd improved the property value. She'd also installed a security system without approval and tried to deduct the cost from her rent payment. In the worst part, Marcus continued, is her attitude about money. She constantly brags about her financial success and acts like she's doing me a favor by renting from me. Last month, she told me she was considering buying a condo and that I should be grateful she's staying in my basic building instead of moving somewhere more upscale. But the revelation that made my blood pressure spike came when Marcus mentioned the illegal subletting. I don't know if you're aware, he said, but your sister has been renting out her spare bedroom on Airbnb for the past 8 months. She's making about $600 a month from it, which violates her lease agreement. I've been trying to address it with her, but she keeps saying she has powerful family connections and that I can't legally stop her. I did quick math in my head. For 8 months, Claire had been collecting $600 a month from illegal subletting while I was paying her full rent of $1,500 through Westfield Holdings. She'd been making nearly $5,000 in unauthorized income while living rent-free on my money, and she'd been using threats about her family connections to intimidate her landlord into allowing it to continue. There's one more thing you should know, Marcus added. Your sister put in her 30-day notice last week. She's planning to move out at the end of next month to a place downtown. She told me she's upgrading to a luxury building because she can afford it now that her career has taken off. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my office building, trying to process what I'd learned. Claire wasn't just living off my financial support. She was actively gaming the system I'd created to help her. She was making money from illegal subletting, treating people poorly because she felt financially untouchable, and planning to move to an even more expensive place that would require even more of my support. The worst part was imagining her conversation with Marcus when she gave notice. I could picture her acting superior and condescending, talking about her success and upward mobility, never knowing that every bit of confidence she felt came from the sister she'd been criticizing to friends and family for years. That afternoon, I called the luxury building where Claire had applied to live. Pretending to be a reference checker, I confirmed that she'd been approved for a unit with monthly rent of $2,200, almost $700 more than her current place. She'd listed her income as $65,000 annually and claimed to have $15,000 in savings. None of it was true. Her actual part-time salary was maybe $28,000, and her savings account had been empty for 2 years. As I drove home that evening, I realized that stopping my financial support wasn't going to be enough. Claire had built an entire life based on lies, and those lies were about to hurt not just her but other people who trusted her false narrative. Her new landlord, her employer who believed she was financially stable, and the women who looked up to her financial advice were all being deceived. The transfer I'd made and the emails I'd sent were just the beginning. Claire's house of cards was about to collapse, but first I needed to make sure everyone could see how it had been built in the first place. The following Monday, I did something that felt both necessary and terrifying. I reached out to my old college roommate, Amy, who worked in corporate recruiting and had connections throughout the Phoenix marketing industry. I needed to understand Claire's actual employment situation before her financial house of cards collapsed around her. I need a favor, I told Amy over coffee at a small cafe downtown. Can you help me get some insight into someone's work situation? It's about my sister and it's complicated. Amy had always been direct, which was why I trusted her with this. After I explained the situation without revealing the financial details, she made some calls to her network. What she discovered made my stomach drop. Claire's job at Pinnacle Marketing wasn't the successful career she'd been portraying on social media. She was working as a part-time social media coordinator, essentially an entry-level position that she'd been in for over 2 years without any promotions. Her supervisor, a woman named Patricia, had been documenting performance issues for months. Your sister has a reputation in the industry, Amy told me carefully. She's known for being difficult to work with and having an inflated sense of her own importance. Patricia told me Claire constantly misses deadlines, argues with feedback, and acts like she's above her actual job responsibilities. The promotion Claire had been posting about on LinkedIn was a lie. There had been no promotion, no raise, and no increased responsibilities. In fact, Patricia had been building a case to terminate Claire's employment due to her poor performance and attitude problems. The only reason Claire hadn't been fired yet was because the company was going through a merger and HR had put a freeze on all terminations until the paperwork was complete. So here's the thing that really concerns me, Amy continued. Claire has been telling people at work that she has significant family money and that this job is just something she does for fun while she builds her personal brand. She's been positioning herself as financially independent, which has made her even more careless about her work quality. Amy showed me screenshots that Patricia had shared with other managers, including social media posts where Claire had tagged Pinnacle Marketing while bragging about her expensive lifestyle. In one post, she'd written about treating her coworkers to expensive lunches because she believes in lifting others up when you're blessed with abundance. Those lunches had been paid for with money from my grandmother's inheritance. The most damaging discovery was that Claire had been lying on internal company forms about her financial status. When Pinnacle Marketing conducted their annual review process, employees were required to disclose any outside income sources or financial conflicts of interest. Claire had listed herself as having significant family inheritance and independent investment income on these forms. If the company discovered these were lies, it wouldn't just be grounds for termination, but potentially legal action for fraud. Patricia is actually relieved that the merger delayed any personnel decisions, Amy explained. She was worried about the potential legal complications of firing someone who claimed to have family money and might sue the company. But if Claire's financial claims are false, it changes everything. That evening, I called Patricia directly. I'd never met her, but I introduced myself as Claire's sister and asked if we could have a confidential conversation about a family situation that might affect Claire's work. Patricia was initially hesitant, but when I explained that Claire's financial situation wasn't what she'd been representing, and that there might be implications for the company, she agreed to meet with me the next day. I need you to understand, I told Patricia when we sat down in her office, that everything my sister has told you about her financial situation is false. She doesn't have family money, inheritance, or investment income. She's been living paycheck to paycheck, and the lifestyle she's been displaying is not sustainable. Patricia listened carefully as I explained the situation without revealing the details of my financial support. I focused on the fact that Claire had misrepresented her financial status and that her claims about family wealth were untrue. This explains so much, Patricia said, shaking her head. Claire's been acting like she doesn't need this job, which has made her careless and entitled. If she's been lying about her financial status on company forms, that's a serious issue. We base certain decisions on those disclosures, including security clearances and project assignments. What Patricia told me next was the most shocking revelation yet. Claire had been assigned to work on accounts for high-end financial services clients, specifically because she'd claimed to understand wealth management and luxury markets through her personal experience. She'd been representing Pinnacle Marketing to clients worth millions of dollars while lying about her own financial background. If our clients knew that the person managing their social media accounts had lied about her financial credentials, it could damage our reputation irreparably, Patricia explained. We've been positioning Claire as someone who understands their lifestyle and financial concerns because of her claimed background. As I left Patricia's office, I realized that Claire's lies had spread far beyond her personal life. She'd built her professional reputation on false claims about financial success, and those lies were about to cost her not just her job, but potentially her entire career in the industry. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the conversation with Patricia and feeling something I'd never experienced before, relief mixed with anticipation. For years, I'd watched Claire benefit from lies and manipulation while I struggled with honesty and hard work. Now, finally, the truth was going to catch up with her. But I also felt a deep sadness for the version of Claire who might have existed if our parents hadn't taught her that she deserves success without effort and praise without achievement. The sister I'd been supporting financially was also the sister who'd been corrupted by a lifetime of unearned advantages, and now she was about to face the consequences of believing her own lies. The next step in my investigation required me to do something I'd been dreading, reaching out to our extended family to understand the full scope of Claire's financial deception. I started with our Aunt Susan, our mother's sister who lived about an hour away in Tucson and had always been the family member most willing to help others in times of need. "Susan, I need to ask you something and I hope you'll be honest with me," I said when I called her that Thursday evening. "Has Claire borrowed any money from you recently?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know before Susan even started talking. "Oh, honey," Susan said, and I could hear the worry in her voice. "I probably shouldn't have, but Claire asked me for help a few months ago. She said she had a temporary cash flow problem because she was waiting for her promotion bonus to come through, and she needed $3,000 to cover some unexpected expenses." Susan explained that Claire had been very specific about the loan terms. She'd promised to pay back the full amount within 60 days, and she'd offered to pay interest to make up for any inconvenience. Claire had explained that she could easily afford to pay it back once her promotion was finalized and her bonus was processed. "Oh, she seemed so confident and successful," Susan continued. "She showed me pictures from her work events and talked about her financial planning. I felt good about helping her because she clearly had her life together, and I knew she was good for the money." That was 4 months ago. Susan had never received a single payment. And when she gently asked about it, Claire had explained that there had been delays with her promotion paperwork, but that everything would be resolved soon. Susan had been understanding because she believed in Claire's financial stability and didn't want to stress her during what seemed like a temporary bureaucratic delay. "Bernadine, is everything okay?" Susan asked. "You sound worried," and Claire seemed so sure about her situation when we talked. I didn't want to reveal the full truth yet, but I asked Susan if she'd heard from any other family members about similar situations. What she told me made my heart race. Our cousin David had borrowed $1,500 from Claire just 2 months ago for emergency car repairs, but Claire had actually borrowed $2,000 from our Uncle Robert to cover David's loan plus some of her own expenses. She told Robert that she was helping family members during tough times and that she had the means to do so, but she needed temporary liquidity. Claire had also borrowed $1,000 from our grandfather's brother, Uncle James, claiming she was putting together a down payment for a condo purchase and just needed to bridge a small gap before her savings transfer went through. "I'm starting to get a really bad feeling about this," Susan said. "Is Claire in some kind of financial trouble?" After I hung up with Susan, I spent the evening calling other family members and piecing together what Claire had been doing. The picture that emerged was horrifying in its complexity and calculation. Claire had been running what amounted to a small-scale Ponzi scheme within our own family, using the financial security I was secretly providing as collateral to borrow money from relatives. She would borrow from one family member, then use part of that money to make small payments to another family member, creating the illusion that she was financially stable and trustworthy. But it got worse. Claire had been telling different family members different stories about her role in these transactions. She'd told Uncle Robert that she was lending her own money to help David with his car repairs, positioning herself as the successful family member who could afford to help others. She'd told David that she was happy to help him because she remembered when others had helped her get started in her career. None of them knew that the foundation of Claire's entire financial narrative was the monthly support I was providing through Westfield Holdings, funded by our grandmother's inheritance. Claire had turned my secret financial help into a complex web of family loans that made her look generous and successful while actually depending entirely on money that wasn't hers. The most painful part was learning how these family members talked about Claire compared to how they talked about me. Uncle Robert had mentioned to Susan how proud he was of Claire's financial success and how she reminded him of our grandmother Helen in her generosity and business sense. Uncle James had told our mother how impressed he was with Claire's financial planning and maturity. Meanwhile, I'd been borrowing $50 from Cousin David just 3 months ago to cover my electric bill, and I'd had to decline attending our cousin's wedding last year because I couldn't afford the travel expenses. Our family saw me as the struggling sister who couldn't get her financial life together, while they praised Claire for the generosity and success that was actually being funded by my grandmother's inheritance. That night, I created a detailed spreadsheet of all the money flowing through our family tracking, where it came from, and where it went. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 4 months, Claire had borrowed nearly $8,000 from various family members while simultaneously making small payments to others, creating the appearance of financial stability and generosity. All of it traced back to the monthly support I was providing, which ultimately came from grandmother Helen's inheritance. The woman who tried to give me a chance to escape the family's favoritism patterns had unknowingly funded an elaborate deception that made those patterns even worse. As I looked at the spreadsheet, I realized that when my financial support ended, Claire wouldn't just lose her apartment and face her own financial crisis. She'd be unable to maintain the payments she'd promised to family members, and they'd all discover that the successful, generous daughter they'd been praising was actually completely dependent on loans and support she'd hidden from everyone. The web of lies was more extensive than I'd imagined, but it also meant that the truth, when it came out, would be even more devastating and undeniable. On Friday morning, I did something that felt like breaking into my own sister's life, but I knew I needed to understand the full extent of the financial disaster that was about to unfold. I used my access to Claire's personal information as an authorized user on one of her credit accounts to request copies of her financial statements from the past year. What I discovered when those documents arrived made me realize that the monthly support I'd been providing had enabled something far more dangerous than just overspending. Claire had been using the financial stability she didn't know I was providing to convince credit card companies that she was a low-risk borrower with reliable income and family financial backing. She had 7 active credit cards with a combined limit of over $43,000, and every single one was maxed out or close to it. The monthly minimum payments alone were over $1,100, which was nearly half of her actual part-time salary. She'd been making those minimum payments using the money I was sending through Westfield Holdings while spending her actual paycheck on day-to-day expenses and entertainment. The spending patterns on the statements told a story that made my hands shake as I read through them. Designer clothes from Nordstrom and Saks Fifth Avenue, expensive dinners at upscale restaurants, weekend trips to San Diego and Las Vegas, premium gym memberships and luxury beauty treatments. Every purchase was something she'd photographed and posted on social media as evidence of her successful lifestyle. But what made it even worse was seeing charges for things she'd claimed to buy for family members. That expensive dinner she'd treated our parents to for their anniversary, putting it on social media with captions about being blessed to spoil the people she loved. $800 on her MasterCard paid for with my support money. the designer handbag she'd given our mother for her birthday, posting about how good it felt to be able to give back to the woman who'd raised her, $600 she couldn't afford, funded ultimately by grandmother Helen's inheritance. I found charges for loans she'd made to family members, which meant she was borrowing money on credit card to lend to relatives, then using my support payments to cover the credit card bills. She was essentially using my money to fund her reputation as the generous, successful daughter while taking on debt that would crush her the moment my payments stopped. The most devastating discovery came when I found applications for 3 additional credit cards that had been submitted in the past month. Claire was trying to increase her available credit by another $15,000, and she was using the payment history I'd been funding as proof of her financial stability. One of the applications included a letter she'd written explaining her financial situation. In it, she described herself as a marketing professional with strong family financial backing and a history of responsible credit management. She'd included her fake salary figures and claimed to have substantial savings and family inheritance support that would guarantee her ability to make payments. I called 2 of the credit card companies using my authority as a financial guarantor on her accounts to understand her current status. What they told me was terrifying. Based on her payment history and claimed income, Claire had been pre-approved for both new cards, which would give her access to an additional $12,000 in credit by the end of the month. Miss Walsh has an excellent payment history and strong financial indicators, the representative from Chase told me. Her application shows reliable income and family financial support, which makes her a preferred customer for our premium card products. But the most shocking revelation came when I learned about Claire's mortgage application. She hadn't just been approved for a pre-qualification. She'd been fully approved for a loan of $320,000 to purchase a downtown condo. The mortgage was scheduled to close in 3 weeks, and Claire had already put down a $5,000 earnest money deposit. I requested a copy of her mortgage application and felt sick reading through it. She'd claimed an annual income of $65,000, listed $20,000 in savings, and stated that she had family financial support that would help with the down payment and monthly expenses. The mortgage broker had verified her employment, but hadn't independently confirmed her income figures, trusting the pay stub she'd apparently falsified. The down payment was supposed to be 15% of the purchase price, which meant Claire needed $48,000 by the closing date. According to her application, $20,000 would come from her savings, $20,000 from family contributions, and $8,000 from liquidating investments. None of it existed. Claire had no savings, no investments, and no family members who knew about the purchase or had agreed to contribute money. She'd been counting on my continued financial support to cover not just the down payment, but the monthly mortgage payments that would be nearly 3 times her actual salary. That evening, I called the mortgage broker, James Patterson, and asked for a meeting to discuss concerns about Claire's application. I didn't reveal my relationship to her, but I presented myself as someone with knowledge of her financial situation who had concerns about the accuracy of her application. "I appreciate your concern," Patterson said, "but Miss Walsh's application has been thoroughly reviewed and approved. She has strong financial indicators and family backing that make her a solid candidate for this loan." When I explained that Claire's income and savings figures were substantially inflated and that she had no actual family financial support, Patterson's tone changed immediately. "Are you saying that the applicant has committed fraud on her mortgage application?" he asked. I confirmed that the financial information Claire had provided was false, and Patterson scheduled an emergency review of her application. If the review confirmed my claims, not only would her loan be denied, but she could face criminal charges for mortgage fraud. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Claire's financial deception had crossed the line from irresponsible spending into criminal activity. She'd committed fraud on credit applications and her mortgage application, and she'd done it all while depending on financial support from the sister she'd been criticizing and dismissing for years. The house of cards wasn't just gonna collapse. It was gonna crash in a way that could destroy her life completely. On Monday morning, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I called my old college friend Jessica, who worked in human resources for a large marketing firm, and asked her to help me understand the legal and professional implications of what Claire had been doing at her job. I need to know what happens when an employee lies about their financial background on company forms, I explained to Jessica over lunch. Not hypothetically. I'm talking about specific false claims about income inheritance and family wealth. Jessica listened carefully as I explained the situation without initially revealing that I was talking about Claire. When I finally told her it was my sister, her expression shifted from professional concern to personal worry. Oh, Bernadine, if your sister has been falsifying information on employment documents, that's grounds for immediate termination and potentially criminal fraud charges, Jessica explained. Companies rely on that information for security clearances, project assignments, and liability assessments. She helped me understand the specific ways Claire's lies could have legal consequences. By claiming false financial backing, Claire had potentially violated her employment contract, misrepresented herself to clients, and created liability risks for her employer. The worst part is that if she's been assigned to work with high-value clients based on these false claims, the company could sue her for damages if they lose business because of the misrepresentation, Jessica warned. That afternoon, I did something that felt like the ultimate betrayal, but that I knew was necessary. I called Patricia, Claire's supervisor, and requested a meeting to discuss information that could affect both Claire's employment and the company's relationship with their clients. When I sat down with Patricia on Tuesday morning, I brought documentation that I'd been gathering copies of Claire's social media posts claiming financial independence, screenshots of her LinkedIn articles about financial success, and evidence of her false claims about family wealth. I need you to know that everything my sister has told your company about her financial background is false, I explained. She doesn't have family money, she's not financially independent, and the lifestyle she's been displaying is not sustainable or real. Patricia reviewed the documents carefully, and I watched her face change as she realized the implications. Claire has been representing our agency to clients worth millions of dollars, Patricia said slowly. We've been positioning her as someone who understands wealth management and luxury markets because of her claimed personal experience. If that experience is fabricated, it could be catastrophic for our client relationships. What Patricia told me next made my stomach drop. Claire had been specifically assigned to work on social media campaigns for 3 major financial services firms and 2 luxury real estate companies. These clients had chosen Pinnacle Marketing partly based on Claire's supposed understanding of high net worth lifestyles and financial planning. Last month, Claire gave a presentation to the board of Westside Wealth Management about reaching affluent millennials through social media, Patricia explained. She positioned herself as someone who understood their target demographic through personal experience. If they find out that was all lies, they could terminate our contract and potentially sue us for misrepresentation. But the most damaging revelation was that Claire had been working on a campaign for Heritage Bank's new wealth management division. She'd been writing social media content and blog posts about financial responsibility, the investment strategies, and building generational wealth. The campaign was scheduled to launch next month with Claire's personal financial story as part of the marketing narrative. We've been planning to feature Claire as a young professional who achieved financial independence through smart planning and family financial education, Patricia said. The campaign materials include her personal testimonials about growing up in a financially savvy family and learning wealth management principles from an early age. I realized that Claire's lies had become so elaborate that they were about to be featured in a major marketing campaign for a bank. Her fake financial success story was going to be broadcast to thousands of potential customers as an example of effective financial planning. Patricia scheduled an emergency meeting with the company's legal team for the following day. She explained that they needed to review all of Claire's work, assess their liability with clients, and determine the appropriate response to what appeared to be deliberate fraud. "I have to ask," Patricia said as our meeting ended, "how long has this been going on? How did Claire manage to maintain this lifestyle and these claims if none of it was real?" I couldn't bring myself to explain the full truth about my financial support, so I simply said that Claire had been living on credit and family loans while misrepresenting her situation to everyone, including her own family. That evening, Patricia called me with an update that made everything feel more real and more serious than I'd anticipated. "Our legal team reviewed Claire's employment file and her client work," she said. "They're recommending immediate termination for fraudulent misrepresentation and a full audit of her client relationships. We're also going to have to notify our insurance company because there could be significant liability issues if clients sue us for damages." She paused before continuing. "Bernadine, I need you to know that this isn't just about Claire losing her job. Depending on how our clients react and what damages they claim, your sister could face criminal charges for fraud. The amounts of money involved in these client contracts make this a felony-level case." As I hung up the phone, I realized that my decision to stop supporting Claire financially had set in motion a chain of events that would expose lies and fraud far beyond what I'd initially understood. Claire hadn't just been living beyond her means. She'd been building a criminal enterprise based on false claims about her background and qualifications. The professional life she'd been so proud of, the expertise she'd been claiming, and the reputation she'd been building were all about to disappear. But more than that, she was about to face legal consequences that could follow her for the rest of her life. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as I realized that the truth was finally going to come out, but it was going to be more devastating than even I had anticipated. On Wednesday evening, I knew I needed to have a conversation that I'd been avoiding for weeks. I needed to understand how deeply our mother's favoritism ran and whether she had any awareness of the financial house of cards that Claire had been building. I called our mother, Margaret, and asked if I could come over to talk. "I need to discuss something important about the family," I told her, trying to keep my voice neutral. When I arrived at my childhood home, Margaret was in the kitchen making dinner, and the smell of pot roast reminded me of Sunday dinners when Claire and I were kids. Back then, I'd always helped with the cooking while Claire was allowed to watch television or talk on the phone because she was too young to handle kitchen responsibilities, even when she was old enough to do the work. "I've been thinking about Claire's success lately," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table where I'd done homework alone while Claire got help from our parents with her projects. "She seems to be doing really well financially." Margaret's face lit up in a way that it never had when we talked about my life. "Oh, Bernadine, I'm so proud of her," she said, setting down her wooden spoon to focus entirely on our conversation. "She's everything I hoped she would become. Independent, successful, generous with her family. She's really figured out how to build a good life." I asked Margaret to tell me more about what she meant by Claire's generosity, and what she said made my chest tighten with familiar pain. "Well, you know, she helped us with your father's dental work last year," Margaret explained proudly. $8,000. And she didn't hesitate when we asked. She said family always comes first, and that she was happy to help because she remembered how we supported her when she was getting started. Margaret went on to describe other examples of Claire's financial generosity: expensive birthday gifts, paying for family dinners at nice restaurants, and offering to help with home repairs that our parents couldn't afford. Every single example was something that had been funded by my secret financial support. but Margaret saw it as evidence of Claire's character and success. "It makes me feel like we did something right as parents," Margaret continued. "Claire learned the importance of family and giving back when you're blessed with abundance." Then Margaret said something that made my blood pressure spike. "I just wish you could learn from her example, Bernadine. Claire has worked hard to build financial security, and now she's able to help others. You're still struggling to take care of yourself, let alone contribute to the family." I took a deep breath before asking my next question. "Has Claire ever talked to you about helping me financially?" Margaret's expression shifted to something that looked like pity mixed with frustration. "Bernadine, we've actually discussed that. Claire is worried about you. She thinks giving you money would enable your problems instead of helping you learn to solve them yourself. She believes that struggling will ultimately make you stronger and more independent." The irony was so painful it was almost funny. Claire, who was living entirely off my financial support, had convinced our mother that she was too wise and responsible to help her struggling sister because it would be bad for my character development. Claire says she learned financial responsibility by facing consequences for her decisions," Margaret explained. "She thinks you need to go through that same process without family bailouts if you're ever going to develop real financial discipline." I asked Margaret what she thought about the differences between how she and our father had treated Claire and me growing up, expecting her to deny that there had been any favoritism. Instead, Margaret surprised me with her honesty. "You were always more independent, Bernadine. Even as a little girl, you figured things out on your own and didn't need as much support. Claire was more sensitive and needed more guidance and encouragement. We gave each of you what you needed." She continued, "Claire needed us to believe in her and invest in her potential. You were already strong and self-sufficient. We knew you'd be fine no matter what happened. But Claire needed that extra support to build confidence and learn how to succeed." What Margaret was describing as responsive parenting, I recognized as the foundation of the dynamic that had damaged both Claire and me in different ways. They'd taught Claire that she deserves support without effort and praise without achievement, while they'd taught me that I had to earn everything alone and be grateful for whatever scraps of attention I received. The truth is, Margaret said, "I'm proud of how differently you two turned out. Claire learned to be successful and generous, and you learned to be independent and resilient. Those are both valuable qualities." The conversation took an even more painful turn when Margaret mentioned that she and our father had been discussing asking Claire to help with their retirement planning. "Claire has offered to look into some investment opportunities for us," Margaret explained. "She understands financial planning in a way that you and your father and I never learned. She might be able to help us make our retirement savings work better." I realized that our parents were about to ask Claire to help them invest their retirement money, trusting her fake financial expertise, and not knowing that her entire lifestyle was funded by my grandmother's inheritance. They could lose everything they'd saved for their old age based on advice from someone who had never successfully managed her own finances. As I drove home that evening, I understood that Margaret's favoritism wasn't just a childhood dynamic that had affected Claire and me differently. It was an active, ongoing force that was about to cause financial and emotional damage to our entire family. Margaret had taught Claire that she was special and deserving, and now she was about to trust her retirement security to someone whose financial success was completely fabricated. She'd taught me that I was responsible for my own problems, and now she was about to discover that the daughter she'd been neglecting had been supporting the daughter she'd been celebrating for years. The conversation with Margaret made me realize that when the truth came out, it wouldn't just destroy Claire's life. It would force our parents to confront the reality of their favoritism and the damage it had caused to everyone in the family, including themselves. Tomorrow, I was going to begin the process of exposing the truth. But tonight, I sat in my car outside my childhood home and grieved for the family we might have been if Margaret and our father had learned to love both their daughters equally, instead of teaching us that love was something that had to be earned and that only one of us was worthy of earning it. Thursday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I spent my lunch break creating what I privately called my truth documentation project. I opened a new folder on my laptop and began systematically organizing everything I discovered about Claire's lies over the past 2 weeks. I started with screenshots of every social media post where Claire had claimed financial independence or given advice about money management. I saved her LinkedIn article about achieving financial freedom, her Instagram posts about treating herself because she worked hard, and her Facebook advice to younger women about building wealth. Each screenshot was dated and organized chronologically to show the pattern of deception. Next, I compiled financial records that proved the reality behind her claims. Bank statements showing my monthly transfers to Westfield Holdings, rental payment records, credit card payment confirmations, and documentation of every dollar I'd sent to support her lifestyle. I created a spreadsheet that matched each of her social media claims about financial success with evidence of the actual financial support she was receiving. I gathered documentation of her lies to family members, copies of loan agreements she'd signed with relatives, text message conversations where she'd promised to repay money she'd borrowed using my support, and records of the payments she'd made to some family members using money that ultimately came from my grandmother's inheritance. The most damaging evidence came from her professional misrepresentations. I had copies of her employment forms where she'd claimed family wealth and inheritance income, her client presentations, where she'd positioned herself as financially successful, and her mortgage application where she'd committed outright fraud about her income and savings. But as I was organizing this evidence, I discovered something that made my hands shake with rage. Hidden in her private Instagram stories, viewable only to close friends, Claire had been drafting posts for what she called her success announcement. She'd written detailed captions for photos she planned to share after her condo purchase closed, and they were designed to publicly humiliate me. One draft post showed a photo of her signing mortgage papers with the caption, "Some people spend their 20s making excuses, others spend them building empires. Grateful for the financial education that taught me to create the life I wanted. Instead of waiting for someone else to save me, not everyone in my family learned these lessons, but I'm proof that you can rise above your circumstances with hard work and smart decisions." Another draft showed her new downtown condo with a caption that mentioned me by name. "My sister Bernadine is always asking why some people succeed while others struggle. The answer is simple personal responsibility, financial discipline, and refusing to play the victim. I'm blessed to be able to set a positive example for my family, even when they're not ready to follow it." She had planned an entire social media campaign designed to contrast her fake success with my real struggles, using the financial support I was secretly providing to fund her platform for publicly humiliating me. She was going to use my grandmother's inheritance money to buy herself a stage for performing her superiority over the granddaughter grandmother Helen had actually chosen to support. I printed every draft and added them to my evidence folder. Then I did something that felt both vengeful and necessary. I created my own social media strategy. I drafted a Facebook post that I planned to publish after Claire's financial support ended and her lies started collapsing. It was simple and factual. Sometimes the people who give advice about financial independence are the ones who understand it least. Truth has a way of surfacing, especially when it involves family money and family lies. I prepared a LinkedIn post that would go live after her professional reputation crumbled. Watching someone build their career on fabricated expertise is painful, especially when that someone is family. The marketing industry deserves authentic voices, not fictional success stories. But I decided to save the most devastating response for Instagram, where Claire had planned to announce her success while mocking my struggles. I drafted a post with a photo of grandmother Helen's letter about the inheritance. My grandmother left me a letter with her inheritance, warning me about family members who take credit for gifts they don't know they're receiving. She was right about many things, including which granddaughter actually understood the value of money and family loyalty. As I worked on this documentation, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the power that comes from having the complete truth when everyone else is believing lies. Claire had built her entire reputation on stories that I could disprove with documents. She'd created a financial life that I could destroy with a single phone call. She'd positioned herself as superior to me using money that I was providing. That afternoon, I called my bank and set up automatic alerts for when the final payments to Claire's accounts would process. I wanted to know the exact moment when her financial support ended so I could track the timeline of her collapse. I also created a private email account and began sending anonymous tips to people who deserved to know the truth. I sent information about Claire's false mortgage application to the State Banking Commission. I forwarded details about her false employment claims to Pinnacle Marketing's corporate compliance department. I provided evidence of her credit card fraud to the financial institutions she deceived. Each email was factual, documented, and devastating. I wasn't trying to destroy Claire's life out of spite. I was trying to protect other people from being harmed by her lies and to ensure that she faced appropriate consequences for fraudulent behavior that had gone on too long. That evening, I did something that felt like both closure and preparation for war. I printed Grandmother Helen's letter and read it again, focusing on the part where she wrote about family members who take advantage of others' generosity without gratitude or awareness. Bernadine. The letter read, "Some people are takers who will drain every resource available to them while believing they deserve more. Don't let anyone convince you that supporting such a person is the same thing as loving them. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the natural consequences of their choices." Helen had known exactly what kind of person Claire was, and she'd tried to protect me from enabling her destructive patterns. For 3 years, I'd ignored that wisdom and funded the very behavior Helen had warned me about. But now I was going to honor my grandmother's intention by letting Claire discover what happened when her unearned advantages disappeared. I spent the rest of the evening organizing my evidence and preparing for the conversations I'd need to have with family members when the truth came out. I wrote drafts of explanations for Aunt Sue and Cousin David, and eventually our parents focusing on facts rather than emotions. By the time I went to bed that night, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete preparation for a confrontation where I held all the cards. Claire had spent years playing a game where she didn't know the rules or even who was really playing. Tomorrow, she was going to discover that her opponent had been setting up this victory for weeks. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Arizona sunshine that used to make me feel hopeful about new beginnings. Today, it felt like the perfect weather for watching a carefully constructed lie finally collapse under its own weight. I arrived at work early and spent the first hour sending the final notifications I'd prepared. The email to Marcus Claire's landlord was straightforward. This serves as formal notice that Westfield Holdings will discontinue rental payments for Unit 4B effective immediately. The tenant is responsible for all future rental obligations. The message to American Express was more detailed. I am formally requesting removal as financial guarantor for account holder Claire Walsh. Effective immediately, I am no longer responsible for any charges, payments, or obligations associated with this account. I sent similar notifications to the 3 other credit card companies where I'd been listed as a backup payment source. Each message was professional, documented, and irreversible. Then I did the thing I'd been both anticipating and dreading for weeks. I transferred the remaining balance from the Westfield Holdings account back to my personal savings. Watching those numbers move felt like reclaiming 3 years of my life that had been stolen by a lie I'd unknowingly enabled. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was Claire. "Bernadine, I need to ask you something weird," she said, and I could hear confusion and the beginning of panic in her voice. "Did you ever set up any kind of business account or anything related to my apartment? The landlord just called me with some confusing message about a company called Westfield Holdings." I let the silence stretch for a few seconds before responding. "What did he say exactly?" "He said that some company that's been paying part of my rent is discontinuing their payments, and I need to take over the full amount starting next month. But that doesn't make any sense, because I pay my own rent. I think there might be some kind of accounting error or identity theft situation." "That does sound confusing," I said calmly. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to call the rental office and straighten this out," Claire said. "There's obviously been some kind of mistake. I've been paying my own rent for years. I would know if someone else was involved." After I hung up with Claire, I felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. She genuinely had no idea that her entire lifestyle had been subsidized by someone else. She'd been living in a fantasy so complete that she couldn't even recognize the reality when it was explained to her directly. At 2 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Patricia from Pinnacle Marketing. "Bernadine, I wanted to update you on the situation with Claire," she said. "We've completed our review of her employment file and client work, and will be terminating her position effective Monday morning. Our legal department has also referred the matter to the State Attorney General's office for potential fraud investigation." Patricia explained that they'd discovered additional false claims Claire had made beyond what I'd initially reported. She'd been lying about her educational background, inflating her previous work experience, and misrepresenting her role in successful client campaigns. "The Heritage Bank campaign has been suspended indefinitely," Patricia continued. "When they learned that our lead strategist had fabricated her financial expertise, they immediately pulled the contract. We're looking at potential damages in excess of $200,000. That evening, I got a text from cousin David. "Hey, did you know Claire was having some kind of financial emergency? She called me asking for a loan to cover some unexpected expenses. She seemed really stressed." I replied that I hadn't heard anything and suggested he might want to be careful about lending money during uncertain times. David responded that he'd told Claire he couldn't help because he was still waiting for her to pay back the $1,500 he'd loaned her 2 months earlier. Around 7 p.m., Aunt Susan called. "Bernadine, I'm starting to worry about Claire. She called me this afternoon asking if I could extend her loan for another few months because she's having some cash flow issues." When I asked about the promotion and bonus she mentioned before, she got really vague and said there had been some delays. I told Aunt Susan that financial situations could be complicated and that maybe she should wait to see how things developed before making any new lending decisions. Susan agreed, but I could hear the concern in her voice. "The thing that worries me," Susan said, "is that Claire sounded different today, less confident, like she was scared about something but didn't want to admit it." At 9 p.m., I received the call I'd been expecting all day. It was Claire again, and this time she was crying. "Bernadine, I don't know what's happening," she said through tears. "I've been having the worst day. My landlord is saying I owe money. I don't owe. My credit card companies are calling about some payment verification issues, and my boss wants to meet with me on Monday morning about some problems with my client work." She paused, and I could hear her trying to pull herself together. "I think someone might be trying to sabotage me, maybe identity theft or some kind of coordinated attack on my accounts. Have you heard of anything like this happening to anyone else?" "That does sound like a lot of things happening at once," I said carefully. "What do you think might have caused all of this?" "I don't know," Claire said, and her voice cracked. I just don't understand how everything could go wrong so fast when I've been so careful about my finances. I've worked so hard to build financial security, and now it feels like it's all falling apart for no reason. As I listened to my sister cry about the collapse of a financial security that had never actually existed, I felt something unexpected, not satisfaction or revenge, but a deep sadness for the years we'd all wasted living in lies that hurt everyone involved. Claire, I said gently, maybe this is a good time to take a really honest look at your whole financial situation. Sometimes, when a lot of things go wrong at once, it means there were problems we weren't seeing before. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about how many people were about to discover that the reality they'd been living in was based on false information. Claire would learn that her financial independence was fiction. Our parents would learn that their successful daughter was actually completely dependent on support from the daughter they dismissed. Our extended family would learn that the generous relative they'd been praising was actually borrowing and spending money that belonged to someone else. The truth was going to hurt everyone, but it was also going to free everyone from a dynamic that had been poisoning our family for years. Tomorrow, the real consequences would begin. But tonight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the peace that comes from knowing that lies were finally going to be replaced with truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. Monday morning arrived with a phone call that I'd been anticipating for days. At 8:15 a.m., while I was getting ready for work, Claire called, and the sound of her voice told me that her world had officially started collapsing. "Bernadine, I need your help," she said, and I could hear that she'd been crying. "Something terrible is happening, and I don't understand any of it." She explained that her landlord had called Sunday night demanding immediate payment of $1,500 for the current month's rent, claiming that her account was 3 months behind due to the discontinuation of payments from Westfield Holdings. When she'd insisted that she'd been paying her own rent all along, Marcus had provided her with detailed records showing that most of her rent had been covered by automatic transfers from a business account she'd never heard of. Then this morning, I got to work and Patricia called me into her office with someone from legal and someone from HR. Claire continued, her voice shaking. "They're saying I misrepresented my financial background on employment forms and to clients, and they're terminating my position immediately. They're also saying there might be legal consequences for fraud." I could hear papers rustling as she talked, and she seemed to be reading from documents they'd given her. "They gave me all these papers about investigations and potential criminal charges, but I don't understand what I supposedly did wrong. I was honest about my financial situation." But the worst news was yet to come. Then I got a call from James Patterson, the mortgage broker, and he said my loan application is being canceled because of false information about income and savings. He said they're reporting it to the State Banking Commission as potential mortgage fraud. Claire's voice broke completely as she continued. "Bernadine, they're saying I could face criminal charges for lying on a mortgage application, but I swear I told the truth about everything. I don't know how this could be happening." I asked her what she planned to do about the immediate problems, and her answer revealed just how completely unprepared she was for financial reality. "I called American Express to make a payment arrangement, but they said my account has been flagged for income verification and they're demanding immediate payment of the full balance," she said. "That's over $8,000, and I don't have it all at once. I've been making monthly payments for years." She'd also called her other credit card companies, only to discover that all of her accounts had been flagged for review, and several had been frozen pending income verification that she couldn't provide. "I called Mom and Dad to see if they could help me figure this out," Claire continued, "and they're completely confused. Dad said maybe I should ask you for advice because you've dealt with financial problems before." The irony was almost unbearable. Our parents were suggesting that Claire ask for financial advice from the sister who had been secretly funding her entire lifestyle for 3 years. I know we haven't always been close, Claire said, but you're the only person I can think of who might understand what's happening. Have you ever heard of anything like this, where someone's entire financial life just falls apart overnight for no reason? I took a deep breath before responding. Claire, I think we need to have a conversation in person. There are some things you need to know that might help explain what's happening. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near her apartment that evening. After I hung up, I spent the day preparing for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. That afternoon, I got updates from several sources about the continuing collapse of Claire's fabricated life. Patricia called to tell me that Heritage Bank had officially terminated their contract with Pinnacle Marketing and was demanding a full refund of fees paid, citing misrepresentation by the account manager. The potential damages had increased to over $300,000. Aunt Susan texted me asking if I knew why Claire had called her that morning, asking for an emergency loan of $5,000 to cover some temporary cash flow issues. Uncle Robert had received a similar call, as had Cousin David and Uncle James. Claire was frantically trying to borrow money from every family member who had ever trusted her false claims about financial success. But the most telling update came from Marcus, Claire's landlord, who called me directly to ask about the Westfield Holdings situation. Your sister came to my office this morning demanding to see records of who's been making payments on her account, he told me. When I showed her 3 years of transfer records from your company, she accused me of being involved in some kind of identity theft scheme. She can't seem to accept that someone else has been paying her rent. Marcus explained that Claire had threatened to sue him for fraud and demanded that he produce the real payment records that would show her own payments. When he explained that she'd only been paying about $300 per month while someone else covered the remaining $1,200, she'd stormed out of his office, claiming that everyone was lying to her. I've been doing this for 15 years, Marcus said, and I've never seen someone so completely disconnected from their own financial reality. She genuinely believes she's been paying her own way, even when I show her documented proof that she hasn't been. That evening, I arrived at the coffee shop 30 minutes early and chose a corner table where we could have privacy for what I knew would be a life-changing conversation. When Claire walked in, I barely recognized her. The confident, polished woman who'd been posting success photos on social media had been replaced by someone who looked exhausted, confused, and afraid. Thank you for meeting me, she said as she sat down across from me. I know we haven't talked much lately, but I'm hoping you can help me understand what's happening to my life. She looked around the coffee shop nervously before continuing. Bernadine, I think someone is trying to destroy me. Too many things are going wrong at once for this to be coincidental. My rent, my job, my credit cards, my mortgage. It's like someone has access to all my accounts and is sabotaging them. I looked at my sister, this person I'd been supporting financially for 3 years, while she criticized me to family and friends, and felt an unexpected moment of compassion for how completely unprepared she was for the truth. Claire, I said gently, I need to tell you something that's going to be very hard to hear, but it's going to explain everything that's been happening to you. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd prepared, setting it on the table between us. Claire looked at it curiously, not understanding that it contained 3 years of documentation that would destroy everything she believed about her own life. Before I explain what's in here, I said, I need you to promise me that you'll listen to everything I have to say before you respond. Can you do that? Claire nodded, though I could see confusion and growing anxiety in her eyes. I opened the folder to the first document, Grandmother Helen's letter about the inheritance. 3 years ago, when Grandmother Helen died, she left me $60,000 that nobody in the family knew about. She left it specifically to me because she'd watched our parents favor you our entire lives and she wanted to give me the support I'd never received. Claire stared at the letter, reading grandmother Helen's handwriting that explained her decision to leave the inheritance to me rather than splitting it between both granddaughters. I used that money to create a business account called Westfield Holdings. I continued showing her bank records and transfer documentation. For the past 3 years, I've been paying your rent, your car payments, and your credit card bills. Every month, I've been sending you over $2,000 to cover expenses you couldn't afford on your part-time salary. I watched Claire's face as she processed this information, seeing confusion shift to disbelief, and then to something that looked like panic. The financial independence you've been claiming doesn't exist, I explained, showing her the spreadsheet I'd created that matched her social media posts about financial success with dates of payments I'd made to her accounts. The lifestyle you've been posting about on social media has been funded entirely by grandmother's inheritance money that you didn't know existed. Claire picked up the documents with shaking hands, staring at bank records that proved my monthly transfers to her landlord, credit card companies, and car loan servicer. "This can't be right," she whispered. "I've been paying my own bills. I keep track of my money carefully." I showed her copies of her actual bank statements that I'd obtained when I removed myself as a financial guarantor on her accounts. Her monthly deposits from her part-time job totaled less than $1,800, while her actual living expenses were over $3,000. The gap had been covered entirely by my support. "Your job at Pinnacle Marketing pays you about $1,500 per month after taxes," I explained. "Your rent is $1,500, your car payment is $400, and your credit card minimums are over $800. You've been spending more than twice what you actually earn, and I've been covering the difference." But the financial revelations were only the beginning. I pulled out screenshots of her social media posts, giving advice about financial independence, and copies of her LinkedIn articles about achieving financial freedom through hard work and smart planning. "While you've been living entirely off my financial support, you've been giving advice to other women about how to build wealth and achieve independence," I said. "You've been positioning yourself as an expert on financial responsibility while being completely dependent on money you didn't know you were receiving." Claire's face was pale as she looked at the evidence, but I could see that she was still trying to find a way to deny or explain away what she was seeing. Then I showed her the most damaging evidence, her draft social media posts planning to publicly humiliate me by contrasting her fake success with my real struggles. "You were planning to mock me publicly for my financial situation using money that I was secretly providing to support your lifestyle," I said, watching her read her own words about how some people make excuses while others build empires. "But wait," Claire said, her voice getting stronger as she seemed to find her footing. "Even if what you're saying is true, you chose to do this. You decided to help me without telling me. That makes you the one who's been manipulating the situation." This was the response I'd expected, and I was prepared for it. I pulled out documentation of her lies to family members' loan agreements with Aunt Susan, Uncle Robert, and Cousin David, all made using the financial security I was providing as collateral. "You've borrowed over $12,000 from our family members using the false impression of financial stability that my support created," I explained. "You used money I was giving you to make payments to some relatives while borrowing from others, creating the illusion that you were financially successful and generous." I showed her records of the money she'd loaned to our parents for their medical and car expenses, money that had ultimately come from my grandmother's inheritance. "You loaned $8,000 to Mom and Dad using my money, then accepted their gratitude and praise for being the successful daughter who could help her family." But the most devastating evidence was yet to come. I pulled out copies of her employment forms, client presentations, and mortgage application where she'd lied about her income savings and family financial support. You've been committing fraud, I said simply. You lied on your mortgage application about having $65,000 in income and $20,000 in savings. You lied to your employer about having family financial backing. You lied to clients about your expertise in wealth management based on personal experience you've never had. Claire stared at the mortgage application documents, seeing her own signature on forms that claimed savings and income that didn't exist. So your entire professional reputation was built on lies about financial expertise you don't have, I continued. The Heritage Bank campaign that just cost your company $300,000 was based on your false claims about understanding wealth management through personal experience. Finally, I pulled out the screenshots I'd saved of her social media posts, mocking me to mutual friends, describing me as jealous and unsuccessful while she was living entirely off my financial support. You've been telling our friends and family that I'm bitter about your success and that I need to learn financial responsibility from your example, I said. You've been using my money to fund a platform for criticizing the person who was making your lifestyle possible. Claire sat in silence for several minutes, looking through all the evidence I'd presented. I watched her face as she processed the reality that her entire adult life had been based on a lie she didn't know she was living. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just anger or embarrassment, but genuine fear. Bernadine, even if all of this is true, she said, I didn't know. I thought I was paying my own bills and earning my own success. How can I be responsible for something I didn't know was happening? This was the moment I'd been preparing for since the day I discovered her birthday party on Facebook. Claire, I said calmly, you've spent 3 years taking credit for a financial stability you didn't create while criticizing me for struggling with problems you couldn't handle either. The only difference is that I was facing my reality while you were living in a fantasy funded by someone else's money. I closed the folder and looked directly at her. The question isn't whether you knew where the money was coming from. The question is what you're going to do now that you know the truth. The week following my revelation to Claire was like watching a demolition in slow motion. Each day brought new consequences as the lies she'd built her life on continued to unravel in ways that even I hadn't fully anticipated. Tuesday morning, I received a call from Patricia at Pinnacle Marketing with an update that made the scope of the disaster clear. Bernadine, I wanted to let you know that Heritage Bank has filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding Claire's fraudulent representations. They're seeking damages, not just for the terminated contract, but for reputational harm to their brand. Patricia explained that Heritage Bank's board of directors felt they'd been personally deceived by Claire's presentations about financial responsibility and wealth management. They'd recommended her as a speaker for their upcoming investor conference based on her supposed expertise, and now they face the embarrassment of having promoted someone whose entire financial narrative was fabricated. The legal department believes this could result in criminal fraud charges, Patricia said. The amounts involved and the deliberate nature of the misrepresentation make this a felony case. Wednesday brought news from Marcus Claire's landlord that she'd been served with eviction papers. She'd tried to negotiate a payment plan, but when he'd asked for proof of income to evaluate her ability to pay, she couldn't provide documentation that would support even half of her claimed salary. Your sister offered to have family members co-sign for her, Marcus told me, but when I explained that co-signers would need to provide their own financial information, she couldn't produce anyone who was actually willing or able to take on that responsibility. The truth was that every family member Claire had borrowed money from was now questioning their own financial exposure. Aunt Susan had called me Tuesday evening, asking if I knew anything about Claire's temporary cash flow problems, because she was starting to suspect they weren't temporary. I've been thinking about the loan I made to Claire, Susan said, and I realized that if she's been having trouble paying rent and credit card bills, she probably doesn't have the money to pay me back either. I'm starting to wonder if I've been lied to. Thursday brought the call I'd been dreading, our mother Margaret crying and confused, asking me to come over immediately to discuss something terrible that's happening to Claire. When I arrived at my parents' house, I found both Margaret and our father Robert sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by financial documents, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen them. Bernadine, Margaret said, Claire came over yesterday and told us some story about you secretly paying her bills for years. She said you've been manipulating her life and that you're trying to destroy her now that she's more successful than you. Margaret's voice was shaking as she continued. But then she asked us to co-sign for a new apartment lease, and when we looked at her financial information, nothing made sense. Her income barely covers her car payment and food expenses, let alone rent, and the loan payments she owes to family. My father Robert, who rarely spoke about emotional matters, looked at me with an expression of confusion and guilt. Bernadine, did you really pay Claire's expenses without telling her? And if you did, where did you get that kind of money? This was the conversation I'd been preparing for since I'd first discovered the inheritance 3 years ago. I sat down at the table and pulled out Grandmother Helen's letter, the same one I'd shown Claire. Grandmother Helen left me $60,000 when she died. I explained, watching their faces change as they processed this information. She left it specifically to me because she'd watched you favor Claire our entire lives and wanted to give me the support I'd never received from family. I handed them the letter and I watched Margaret's face crumble as she read Grandmother Helen's words about the favoritism she'd witnessed and her desire to help the granddaughter who'd been overlooked. I used that money to support Claire for 3 years. I continued, because I thought I was being the kind of sister I wished I'd had. I paid her rent car payments and credit card bills through a business account, and she never knew where the money was coming from. Robert looked at the bank records I'd brought, his expression growing more serious as he understood the scope of what had been happening. She's been living entirely off your grandmother's inheritance while telling everyone she was financially independent, he said slowly, and we've been praising her for success that was actually your generosity. Margaret was crying now, but I could see that she was beginning to understand the full implications of what she was learning. Claire came to us yesterday asking for help, but she couldn't explain how she'd gotten so far in debt. If she'd been managing her money well, Margaret said. When we asked about the $8,000 she loaned us last year, she couldn't explain where that money had come from either. I showed them the loan documents Claire had signed with family members, the falsified employment information she'd provided to her mortgage broker, and the evidence of her lies about financial expertise to her employer and clients. Claire didn't just spend your inheritance money, I explained. She used the false sense of security it provided to commit fraud, deceive family members, and build a professional reputation based on lies about her background. The most painful part of the conversation came when I showed them Claire's draft social media posts, planning to humiliate me publicly while using my money to fund her platform. She was going to mock me for being financially unsuccessful using money that I was secretly providing to support her lifestyle. I explained, she's been telling people I'm jealous of her success while living entirely off the inheritance that Grandmother Helen left to me. Robert put his head in his hands. We did this, he said quietly. We taught her to expect support without appreciation and success without effort. We taught you to give without receiving credit or gratitude. Margaret was reading through the evidence with growing horror. Bernadine, how long has she been lying to us about her job and her financial situation? According to her employer, she's been misrepresenting her background since she was hired, I explained. The financial independence she claimed was completely fabricated. Her actual part-time salary is less than $1,500 a month after taxes. That evening, I received a text from Claire. I talked to Mom and Dad today. They said you showed them some documents about money. We need to discuss this situation before it gets out of hand. I replied, "Claire, the situation got out of hand 3 years ago when you started building your life on lies. What's happening now isn't me destroying your life. It's your life revealing what it actually was underneath the lies." She responded, "You manipulated this whole situation. You created a problem by helping me without permission, and now you're using it to hurt me. This is your fault, not mine." I didn't reply to that message. Claire was facing the consequences of fraud, deception, and financial irresponsibility that had damaged multiple people and institutions. The fact that she still saw herself as a victim rather than the perpetrator told me that she hadn't learned anything from the experience. Friday morning, I received the call I'd been expecting. James Patterson, the mortgage broker, informing me that Claire's case had been referred to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division for investigation of mortgage fraud. When someone lies about their income and savings by the amounts your sister did, he explained, it becomes a federal case. She could face significant fines and prison time if convicted. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Claire's attempts to blame me for her problems weren't going to protect her from the legal consequences of her choices. The house of cards hadn't just collapsed. It had revealed criminal behavior that would follow her for years to come. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was living in reality instead of enabling someone else's fantasy. The truth was painful for everyone involved, but it was also the foundation for whatever came next. 6 months have passed since that devastating week when Claire's fabricated life collapsed completely, and the changes in our family have been more profound than I could have imagined. Today, as I sit in my new apartment, overlooking the valley where I grew up, I can finally see the full scope of what we've all learned from this painful experience. Claire faced the full consequences of her choices. She was convicted of mortgage fraud and sentenced to 18 months probation with community service and financial restitution requirements. Her professional reputation in the marketing industry was destroyed permanently, and she lost the respect of friends and family members who discovered the extent of her deception. But perhaps the most important consequence was that she was forced for the first time in her life to live within her actual means. After losing her apartment and her job, Claire moved to Denver to stay with our cousin Rachel, who offered her a place to live in exchange for help with childcare and household responsibilities. "It's been humbling," Claire told me during a phone call last month, and I could hear something in her voice that I'd never heard before: genuine humility. "I'm working as a server at a family restaurant and sharing a bedroom with Rachel's teenage daughter. For the first time in my adult life, I actually know how much money I make and how much my expenses cost." She paused before continuing. "I keep thinking about what you said about facing reality versus living in a fantasy. I spent so many years believing I was successful that I never learned how to actually become successful." The criminal charges and professional consequences forced Claire into therapy as part of her probation requirements, but she continued the sessions voluntarily after completing her mandatory hours. "My therapist helped me understand that I wasn't just lying to other people about my finances," Claire explained. "I was lying to myself about who I was and what I deserved. I genuinely believed I was entitled to success and financial support because that's what our parents taught me to expect." Our parents faced their own reckoning with the role they'd played in creating this disaster. Margaret entered therapy to address what the counselor identified as differential parenting patterns that had damaged both daughters in different ways. "I taught Claire that she was special and deserving without requiring her to develop competence or character," Margaret told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings that we'd started after the truth came out. "And I taught you that love and support had to be earned through perfect behavior and self-sacrifice." Robert struggled more with accepting responsibility, but he eventually acknowledged his role in the family dynamics that had hurt all of us. "I was so proud of having a successful daughter that I never questioned whether her success was real," he admitted. I wanted to believe Claire was doing well because it made me feel like a good father. I ignored signs that something wasn't right because I preferred the fantasy. The most meaningful change came in my parents' relationship with me. For the first time in my adult life, they began to see and appreciate the person I actually was, instead of comparing me to their idealized version of Claire. Bernadine, we owe you apologies that we can never fully make, Margaret said during one of our conversations. You spent 3 years supporting your sister financially while we criticized you for not being more like her. You were generous and responsible and loving, and we couldn't see it because we were too invested in our false beliefs about both of you. Our extended family learned important lessons about financial boundaries and the difference between helping people grow versus enabling destructive behavior. Aunt Susan, Cousin David, and Uncle Robert all implemented new policies about family loans after discovering how Claire had manipulated their trust and generosity. I realized that I was so eager to believe Claire was successful that I ignored obvious warning signs about her financial management. Aunt Susan told me, real financial success creates stability and confidence, not constant crises and emergencies. The family members who had loaned money to Claire eventually accepted that they wouldn't be repaid, but they used the experience to develop healthier approaches to financial support within the family. As for me, the experience taught me the most important lesson of my adult life: the difference between love and enabling, between supporting someone and subsidizing their self-destruction. I used the remaining portion of Grandmother Helen's inheritance to establish a scholarship fund at our local community college for students who demonstrate academic potential despite financial hardship and family challenges. The Helen Walsh Memorial Scholarship provides support for young people who, like me, have had to develop independence and resilience without family financial backing. I wanted to honor my grandmother's intention to support people who'd been overlooked, I explained to the scholarship committee, but I also wanted to ensure that the support helps people grow stronger rather than become dependent. The scholarship recipients are required to maintain academic standards, participate in financial literacy courses, and volunteer in their communities. The goal is to help them develop genuine competence and character rather than just providing money that might enable poor choices. I also use the experience to transform my own relationship with money and family. I moved to a larger apartment that I could afford, comfortably started saving for long-term goals instead of emergency assistance for others, and began building the kind of financial security that Claire had pretended to have. Most importantly, I learned to recognize the difference between temporary help that enables growth and ongoing support that prevents someone from developing necessary life skills. The hardest part, I told my therapist, was accepting that my desire to be the supportive sister I'd never had was actually hurting Claire by preventing her from facing the natural consequences of her choices. Claire and I have rebuilt our relationship slowly based on honesty, rather than the lies and resentment that had defined it for years. She's working to pay back what she can to family members, though it will take years at her current salary level. I understand now why Grandmother Helen left the inheritance to you instead of splitting it between us, Claire said during our most recent conversation. She knew I would waste it without learning anything, and she knew you would use it thoughtfully even if you made mistakes along the way. The most profound change has been in how our family talks about success, responsibility, and love. We've learned that real family support means helping people develop their own capabilities rather than shielding them from the challenges that create growth and character. True success, Margaret said recently, isn't having someone else solve your problems or fund your lifestyle. It's developing the skills and character to handle your own responsibilities while still being able to help others when they genuinely need support. As I finish writing this story, I'm preparing for a conversation that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Tomorrow, Claire and I are going to visit Grandmother Helen's grave together for the first time since her funeral. We're going to thank her for the inheritance, but more importantly, we're going to thank her for the lesson that took us 3 years to understand. Real love sometimes means allowing people to face the consequences of their choices so they can learn to make better ones. Real family support means helping each other grow stronger, not enabling each other to stay weak. And real success means building a life based on truth effort and genuine capability rather than lies, manipulation, and unearned advantages. The birthday party that started this whole journey was supposed to celebrate Claire while ignoring me, just like our family had done for decades. But in the end, it taught all of us that true celebration comes from honoring people for who they really are and what they've actually accomplished, not for the fantasies we prefer to believe about them. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to discover who they really are when the lies fall away. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to stop enabling the lies that hurt everyone involved, including the person you think you're helping. I hope my story helps you think about the difference between love and enabling in your own relationships. Have you ever found yourself supporting someone in a way that prevented them from growing? How do you balance helping the people you care about with allowing them to face the natural consequences that help them develop strength and character? If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and I hope my journey helps you build healthier, more honest relationships with the people you love.